Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring the New Stack's coverage from KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con in Copenhagen, Denmark. Learn more about the CNCF and its technical projects at cncf.io. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack. Friday afternoon in Copenhagen, the last day of KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con. You know what the funny thing is, it seems like it got busier every day. I don't know, did you have more people coming in during the show?
Not much, but we were full from the get-go.
That's great, but I want to just start and thank you for that amazing party last night at the Tivoli Gardens. This is a historic amusement park, more than 100 years old, I think, right?
It was fantastic.
It was just so great, so thank you so much.
But of course, it is the people there that makes it so much fun, and I had a great time as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of people now, aren't there?
There are. There's 4,300, and lots of huggy? Huggy?
Hygge. What does huggy mean?
Hygge.
It doesn't translate perfectly, but it's cozy or warm, and it's what Denmark is supposed to be famous for.
Okay.
And this venue is just fantastic. It's the most amazing venue I've seen.
Neat stuff.
But we had a theme in Austin of Keep Cloud Native Weird. And then we extended that here with Keep Cloud Native Hygge.
Hygge.
And then we'll see how we can extend that trend for Shanghai in November and
yeah, so
Seattle
what's it going to be in Shanghai? Keep Cloud?
It's a little boring, but probably spicy.
Spicy?
And then caffeinated would be the obvious.
Caffeinated for Seattle? Okay. All right, well, great. Well, we wanted to talk about two topics, didn't we, Libby? One is really about the community, overall community, and also what are some of the, and we also want to talk about governance, didn't we?
The health of the project and the long-term viability. How do you, keep an open source project healthy, and how you measure health in a project?
So go ahead. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Kubernetes community has done a lot of thinking around the health of the community and governance models. And, Sarah Novotny's not here today, but she's done a lot of work on articulating the values that the Kubernetes community holds. And of course, we've set up a steering committee that is elected by the community that, first of all, formulates the values, but then also takes care of the health of the community and issues that may arise in the community, whether they be interpersonal issues or technical issues. They can be sent to the steering committee, and the steering committee intervenes, and they give a lot of guidance. It's not a top-down structure, especially open source, but having some of the most respected people in the community on the governing board or the governance committee, steering committee, is how we've been structuring it in Kubernetes.
And I think to reflect on the values that Sarah's been codifying, and she really has been a collector of those values, observing them, seeing them in play, and how they actually affect and act in the community. A level down from the steering committee is the special interest groups, and what you have is these aggregations of subject matter expertise around things like networking or storage, and then you have some sort of cross-cutting special interest groups, like Aparna and myself participate in SIG-PM, which is focused on product, project, and program management. So what we're really trying to do is get decision-making as close as possible to the people who are most capable of making those decisions in a way that's reflective of community values and the needs of the project as a whole.
It seems like, though, that at the same time, you can only make decisions by the people who are already in the community, right?
Yes.
So how do you start to build the community, grow the number of contributors, the diversity of the contributors, so that decisions are starting to be made in, more by more diverse group of people?
So I think the first step is actually observing what's happening in the community, and the metrics actually help a lot with that, and that's something that the CNCF has assisted with setting up DevStats. So you're monitoring how many unique contributors are there, how much volume is there in terms of commits, where is that coming from, and then as a group, we get together. Actually, at every KubeCon, we have a developer summit or a contributor summit, and we also have a kind of a leadership summit, which is the leads of all of the SIGs, and we look at those metrics and say, well, where do we need to go? And some of the things that we noticed, through the course of last year was, well, we really need to stabilize this project. Maybe test quality is not as high. There's lots of distributions. We need to work on a conformance program. We need to get the contributor path ironed out better, so it's easier for people to participate. One of the things is, as the project has gotten bigger, people don't know how to contribute and how do they get in and who do they go to. So Paris, who's not here at the moment, she's been working on a easier on-ramp for contributors and kind of a mentoring program, and that's like a huge passion of hers. And so we identify these areas, and then of course someone volunteers and spearheads that area and creates a solution.
Dan, what's the role of the CNCF in that?
Yeah, thankfully the role of the CNCF has been able to be pretty small for a lot of these areas. There's a European Union concept called subsidiarity, which is to try and push every decision possible as low as it can be. And so within the Kubernetes project, they now have these concepts called sub-projects that can pop up and work on something specific. And if they can resolve it and create new code and do it, then it does. If not, it can pop up to SIGs. You have this new working group structure, which can be cross SIGs. Things that get escalated could go up to the Kubernetes Steering Committee. In principle, things could be appealed to the Technical Oversight Committee or the CNCF Governing Board, but essentially that would only happen if there was some sense in which the steering committee wasn't following its own processes, and thankfully that's never needed to be the case. We have a philosophy in CNCF. There is no CNCF way that we say here's the proper way to run an open source project. We have what we call a bring your own governance process. Now in reality, none of the projects that come to CNCF so far have been sort of fully baked, and so they've needed to each go through a process, and it's actually been somewhat long and painful for several of them, like Kubernetes and Prometheus. And we've offered suggestions along the way, or offered to provide help, but bluntly, most of them have been able to come up with things that they are happy with and that they go forward on. So in a lot of ways, I really see CNCF's role as more just providing resources to help those projects be successful. And DevStats, and I'll give that shout out, it's k8s.devstats.cncf.io, is a good example of that, where the project wanted more information on what they were doing. And then certified Kubernetes would be probably a bigger example.
Yeah, I think, well, first I want to say from the point of view of the Kubernetes community, we really pride ourselves, I think, on being a merit-based community. So the more you contribute, the more you have the ability to contribute, and the quality of your contributions really matter. And that's how, that's why the steering committee is election-based and so forth. But where the CNCF has been really helpful, obviously, with the conformance program. So the conformance program is something that also came out of the community in terms of the idea of the conformance program and the writing of the tests and the test suites. But the CNCF really helped to broaden it and to enforce it, and also to assist with the test suites. So where we need assistance, we reach out to the CNCF, and it has been a great funding body. And so now we've been talking about a bounty security, related bounty program with the CNCF. So those are some of the things that, obviously, in addition to DevStats, that the CNCF provides. And then from a open source projects perspective, beyond Kubernetes, in terms of the Kubernetes ecosystem and beyond, the CNCF is the technical oversight committee of the CNCF is the body that selects the projects that go into the CNCF.
So are you guys hiring developers to do the testing then right now?
We have created a program. It's really just sort of starting up right now, where we're using an external test shop in Argentina to do some test development. But I really want to emphasize that the governing board, which is ultimately my boss and funding that work, sees this as a temporary sort of paying off of technical debt. In a lot of ways, the more important step was to say that new features and new options are coming into Kubernetes at any time, and SIG architecture, which ultimately controls this definition of what it means to be Kubernetes, to be conformant, they set down a rule a few months ago saying that new things could come into alpha or beta stage, but they can only reach stable if they have these conformance tests included in them.
Right. So conformance really is defined by SIG architecture, which is the technical leadership of the Kubernetes community, and so they define what is core Kubernetes. Yeah, and so, and I'm part of the governing board of the CNCF, and I think the board does not want to manage the project, any project, and that feeling of the community is very strong.
But on this temporary piece, once they've set this rule, so we're not going to dig the hole any deeper of Kubernetes API features that don't have conformance tests. But the reality is that there are a bunch of those APIs today that don't have them. And so that we agreed that we were going to go begin this effort to try and backfill and complete, get out of that technical debt.
Right. For the developers, what do they want? They want access to the APIs, right? I mean, inside Kubernetes, right?
Well,
I mean, they want the distribution to be robust enough.
The developers want, they want innovative features.
Right.
They also want stability. They want to know, they want us to set expectations in terms, what stage is a particular feature? What's coming next? When will it be? Some level of predictability. I think that's one of the things.
Yeah, the predictability, I think, is a
aspiration is that if you install an app and it works correctly on OpenShift, that you should be able to move to GKE or EKS or any of the 55 certified Kubernetes distributions.
There's 55.
Exactly.
There was 55 6 months ago. So.
If 6 months ago, I think there were 20 something. But I mean, 9 months ago there were 0. It's been an insanely successful program that we have. Essentially, every vendor in the space has signed on to this program and is committed to work together on it.
So as kind of like, cloud services are adopting Kubernetes, for example, and hosting providers, they may be on, this is the issue with conformance, right? They may be on different versions of of Kubernetes.
Yeah, so you are conformant for a particular version. Right. So conformance carries a version with it. So if you're conformant to 1.8, that means that you've run the tests associated with 1.8, and conformance is only valid for the period of 1 year from the date that the release was cut. So the 1.8 release was cut in September or October of 2017. And so if you certified today to 1.8, then you will be conformant until September of 2018, and then you need to recertify to a different version. So conformance actually has the concept of upgrading baked into it.
If I can give one level more detail. So today you can actually only do the current version or the previous version. So you can't even certify a new 1.8 distro. It's only 1.9 or 1.10. But what's interesting is that if, like GKE, you certified to 1.7 a year ago, as long as you keep doing a newer version, and GKE does all of them, but if you could even skip and you could do one a year, 1.7, 1.11, 1.15, then your old versions do remain conformant. But if you ever go without a year of having a new conformant version, then your old ones lose certification. And this is pretty powerful, we think, because it keeps people on the release train and saying, yes, they are going to make the new features of Kubernetes commercially available, but they can still support an old version if they want to.
Yeah, and I think it's very, very important for developers because not only is it enabling the interoperability or some guarantee of interoperability, but also predictability. So when you think about, here's what's in 1.8, if that's a conformant distribution of 1.8, then you know that it's going to work the way that it was intended. So that predictability is very, very important.
So I'm sorry. I was just going to ask, from your perspective, then, how is what is your job then, to managing the governance model, really, and helping understand the governance model, how are you planning to adapt, right? As the community grows. There are 4,300 people here. I'll put it on the line. My guess is 8,000 for Seattle. That's what I'm gonna just put that out there. But if you have that many developers kind of involved in just kind of at a conference, the user space is some exponential, number beyond that. So, and there's been numbers quoted throughout the conference about the number of developers who are going to see, enter the professional, workspace. 100 million developers by, in 10 years. So.
I think at its core, governance is really about fusing the needs of the community and the needs of the users of the product together. Governance in its best form is a way of providing transparency and a way of auditability across how decisions are made, and to help preserve that transparency. Google is really serious about governance and trying to have super healthy, inclusive, diverse communities. And governance is a way of sort of leveling the field on that regard, to have accountability around those concepts. Because people can say, well, we want to promote diversity and we want to promote inclusion, but that's only as good as the actions behind that. And so we are constantly trying to be observant and vigilant of those things. Like, for example, making sure that our code of conduct, the CNCF code of conduct, and all the things around that are very obvious to people who participate in these events. So that's sort of a uniting force that governance plays in terms of tangible results at our conferences and the ways that we interact with one another. Governance is also a way to scale human trust, that we have community of trust between organizations and different bodies across the organization. So SIGs have trust from the steering committee, and working groups have trust from the SIGs, and sub-projects have trust from the SIGs. So it's just a way to spread out, to load balance, if you will, the trust in our community.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Kubernetes is sort of it's like a baby, for Google. It's something that started at Google, and it's really very important for us to ensure that it thrives and it grows. And as you said, it is growing very quickly. And this is why we formed SIG Architecture. And Brian Grant, one of the founders of the project, and a principal engineer at Google, he is very devoted to ensuring the stability of the core, and Tim Hawkin and others as well, making sure that we're not growing, at a pace that is unsustainable. And similarly on the governing side, and we already mentioned Sarah, making sure that the values of the community are encapsulated and
I will mention one other strength of the involvement with CNCF, where Kubernetes is such an extraordinary success that if CNCF didn't exist, all of these other projects, all this other code would, I'll just start that again, all these other projects, all this other code would try to get into Kubernetes to say, oh, how can we get involved in that? How can we be it? But there's an aspiration among particularly SIG architecture, but I really think within the entire community, to try and make Kubernetes smaller. And so, for example, one of the areas there is that the Google Cloud functionality, and for another 7 of the core clouds, is being factored out of Kubernetes so that it doesn't have to be built into every version. But there's a ton of subsidiary projects of things like Scaffold and Kaneko from Google, or Draft and Brigade from Microsoft, Telepresence from a startup DataWire, that are all trying to improve the ecosystem. And those can actually come to CNCF and become CNCF projects, and hopefully get a Peloton effect of being involved in Kubernetes and being seen as smart ways or integrated ways of doing things. But I think a lot of people have the goal of Kubernetes being smaller rather than the code now. The community is definitely going to get larger.
The code, I was looking at the numbers, that has grown 10x since the 1.0. So we just finished 1.10, and the code is literally 10x bigger.
But the cloud piece will help that. That might actually reduce.
Yeah, so the cloud piece is no different from the storage piece or the networking piece or the runtime piece. We're establishing interfaces, pluggable interfaces for things that should be pluggable. And so the cloud provider interface allows you to plug in different infrastructure underneath Kubernetes. And so whether that's VMware or it's any other kind of environment, OpenStack, that's what the cloud provider interface is for.
Yeah, and I think just generally speaking, from the architecture standpoint, extensibility is the future. We want a thriving ecosystem with a very stable core. And so we really want to make sure that we're anticipating needs through creating genericized interfaces as opposed to trying to do specific implementations.
And it also speeds up innovation, because the innovation can happen at a different cycle.
Yep.
It's encouraging to me to hear you talk about project health, not just in terms of pure growth. So if you're talking about scaling back the code base, making it more manageable, that actually raises something that I heard in the keynotes today, which was, I think somebody said something along the lines of Kubernetes is so 2015, and that the next thing is serverless. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, how you envision sort of, that slowing of the growth and the more stable maintenance of the project, and to allow for new evolutions of the project.
So I'll take that first, which is we love serverless. We think serverless is the future in a lot of ways. And we also expect that the vast majority of serverless in the future is probably going to be running on top of Kubernetes. So there's been a serverless working group in CNCF. There's also a ton of other efforts going on it. But one of the really neat things is to look at the great strengths of serverless, the developer model of how easy it is to do code, the infinite scalability, the micro billing, and decompose those aspects and then say, how can we make them available actually in an open source way that avoids provider lock-in. And so there's been a ton of interest there. We've had a very popular serverless track here at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. So we've had projects like OpenFaz, Kubeless, Fission. I'm going to leave a couple out and really upset people. They're all on the serverless landscape, I might add, at s.cncf.io. I don't have a prediction for you yet on which are going to be the winning ones, but we think there's a very good chance it'll be Kubernetes underneath.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects to serverless. Kubernetes, first of all, is a platform, and so it runs lots of different things. There are 15 serverless frameworks that run on Kubernetes, so clearly it's a popular platform for serverless. I think the thing that I'm most excited about serverless and what Kubernetes brings here is that it'll be open. Serverless technology being something that runs on a platform that runs anywhere and is open is going to unlock new innovation. And then the other piece is really just being able to use infrastructure very efficiently and for short periods of time. Kubernetes and containers are really ideal for that, and which is why it's the basis of serverless.
And so, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so to touch another point on what you said about velocity slowing in the project, feature velocity, feature richness is probably going to be the focus. So instead of, when Kubernetes first came out, a lot of the focus was on what's missing. And right now, what we're looking at is what's present and what needs to be richer. So a lot of the development is in enhancing and promoting and creating more stability and richness around existing feature sets.
So what are you trying to make richer?
Everything that is implemented in some way could be
So for example, what are some of the implementation?
Well, I think like all of the storage interface and networking interface, all those things, using gRPC in interesting ways to provide hooks out to certificate providers. Just generally speaking, stability of code, so a lot of bug fixes going in, that's a huge thing. So 1.10 we had a slightly lower feature density, but in terms of bug fixes and stability going into the code, there was a lot. So that's really, really important.
I mean, I mentioned 3 key areas in my keynote in terms of looking back and also looking forward for the roadmap: security, applications, greater application support. That's actually a very, very interesting area. And then developer experience. All 3 areas, actually. I think those are innovation areas.
What do you mean by application support?
So a platform is only as good as the applications that it can run. And right now, Kubernetes, containers started as being the platform for stateless applications. And we've traveled a lot further than that. Actually, on GKE, 40+% of clusters are running stateful applications, which is a very healthy number. And so the constructs that were required to run stateful applications like data stores, databases, are there. And not only are they there, users are using them, which is very nice and very encouraging. And then, of course, analytics with Spark and batch processing, and then machine learning. This platform, Kubernetes, is very popular, and I think now getting to be proven for these types of workloads. There are other workloads still in the enterprise that we have yet to address. And I think there was a customer here that spoke about how they don't want 2 platforms. They don't want like a fast platform and a slow platform. They just want one platform for everything everything in the enterprise, and it should be the fast platform.
Magic.
Yes.
When it comes down to thinking about, the community and how that community is going to, change over the next, 12 to 18 months, what are the, I learned this from someone recently about how when they do interviews, they ask questions about what is a dysfunctional environment to you? Have you ever been in a dysfunctional environment? And how would you and how have you adapted to that dysfunctional environment, right? What is that dysfunctional environment that you want to just keep so far away from Kubernetes so it doesn't affect you? Because one of the problems with growth is that lack of vision, right? Is that, so maybe you can help us kind of think of that in the context of the values that you're setting, to help think of this kind of like, these two opposites, so that, because we don't want the dysfunctional world, but you always got to be thinking about what are those kind of issues that are out there that need to be paid attention to prevent that.
I'll maybe start here where I don't feel like Jaice and Aparna in some ways are taking enough credit for what an extraordinary accomplishment Kubernetes is. Depending on the way you measure it, you can argue that it's the third largest distributed project, distributed communications, distributed infrastructure, distributed project of any kind that's ever existed.
Exactly.
So Wikipedia would be first,
Yes.
and Linux would be second.
Right.
And so at times it's felt like we've had a little bit of a success disaster of people getting overwhelmed by different things and not being able to respond to issues or
Right.
figuring out the governance and trying to change that on the fly and such. But the fact that it does still seem to have this level of traction and engagement and such is a pretty amazing thing.
I guess one way to think about this is, how does that translate into like GitHub? We were having this conversation before about, Kubernetes representing something like 20% of GitHub's traffic, right? So how do you think about? It was mentioned. This was something that was actually said. I can't remember if it was in a public place or not, but someone was saying. It actually was a conversation I had with someone. This was their claim, right? They're one of the contributors to the Kubernetes, and so they have some context, I expect. I don't know what they're basing it upon or what that 20% actually means, but anyway, it's significant, right? There's no doubt about that. But how does this then translate into the tool sets that you're developing or that need to be developed to kind of help manage kind of this unprecedented type of community that is using GitHub, but there's a lot of falling down, there's a lot of issues that need to come. I'm curious about that direction and how that will play out through the values that you're speaking of.
Well, so one other value is around automation. So if we can have automation take place and take the place of human processes, that's something that's really core to how we try and operate. So as release leader for 1.8 and 1.10, even those 9 months between when I started 1.8 and when we finished 1.10, we saw a tremendous uptick in automation, and we're implementing improvements around how we handle the integration testing and just the general release processes. Also trying to make it so that it's less Google-centric in terms of the release process mechanics. So again, we're trying to identify those areas where automation makes just perfect sense, and that helps take some of that edge off of the human and scale-related issues with GitHub, and also the release process.
I don't usually think of the word dysfunctional when I think of the Kubernetes community or the Kubernetes project, so I have there's just no association with that. I think that certainly growth has its challenges, and we're very
Well, you're trying. I think any organization is trying to avoid dysfunction.
Sure.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I think we have a slightly greater ambition than that, than just avoiding this. We want to be highly
That's very
functional.
true. I would say
We want
that.
to be highly functional, highly productive.
But it comes down to how you manage the community.
And inviting and transparent. I think those are all our goals. I would state them that way. Yeah, I think one form of dysfunction that we're trying to avoid is where there isn't contribution, where people are not contributing to the project. And instead there's just consumption of the project. I think that is that's why we monitor level of contribution, and then also type of contribution. I think some of it is encapsulated in the chop wood, carry water, right? So if the project needs documentation, or the project needs testing, or the project needs project management, that is something that's a shared responsibility amongst all of the companies that are part of the community, and certainly the technical contributions. That's how you earn your stars in the Kubernetes community, and I think that's a form of function. We have very high aspirations for that form of function and recognition.
Mm-hmm. And I'd also add that as a community, we're very cognizant of other communities. When you're taking a cross-country flight, there's 3 jets in front of you, and they're constantly talking between each other about, hey, you're gonna hit some turbulence over Tulsa or wherever that is. And what we do as a community, we have these dialogues. In fact, there was one a couple days ago between the OpenStack community and Kubernetes about what are the things that went wrong, or what are the things that went right, and how do we share those learnings across projects? You see that Cloud Foundry is actively involved in this, and that we're sharing stories there and learning how to leverage those best practices, or where things work well. So we're constantly engaged in a very constructive dialogue around what are the things that we know are anti-patterns and how do we avoid those.
Yeah, and it is not just foundations and so forth. It is very much individuals. Google, for example, I think we have grown our individual contribution to, I was looking at the numbers, to Kubernetes, to now 350 or so engineers that work on the Kubernetes project. It's the single largest team that works on the Kubernetes project. But it's very, very important to us that other companies contribute and contribute meaningfully to the technical aspects of the project and the non-technical aspects of the project. So creating an inviting environment. And I think if we lose that, that's a form of dysfunction. Also for users, so again, framing that in terms of our aspiration, we want users to contribute. There was a really good talk yesterday, keynote by Spotify, about users and how users can contribute and what the benefits of that are for other users.
Dave Zalutsky, and it was that
was a great talk.
Emotional talk where he just talked about how grateful he was for what he's able to take advantage. And this is, of course, the whole idea behind open source that maybe we don't always live up to. But I found it inspiring to hear his commitment to contribute back as well.
So you just mentioned, though, that Google has 350 engineers devoted to contributing to the project, and I believe that Google is the top or one of the top contributors to the project in
Yes.
general. So is that, if you're looking to diversify?
Well, there's 2 amazing graphs where Google's contributions have actually been going up over time, but their contribution as a percentage of the whole
Proportion.
has been going down because there's so many other companies that are now engaged and working with it, which is really the ideal of what you would hope for.
Yeah, the total contributor unique monthly count is, I think, now at 1,700, and it has grown 6x from the 1.0 release. So, and not everybody is contributing in equal measure, but that count is important. And Google contributing more, a lot of our contribution is actually mentoring other contributors and bringing them up the ladder of contribution.
Well, I guess as more contributors come in, then, how can they, for the ones who are out there who are just thinking about getting, who are just very new to this world, how would you recommend they get involved and start to learn how to participate in this organization and, and just live it to some degree?
Yeah, that's front of mind because it's a large project with a lot of moving parts. So there is a SIG contributor experience which is dedicated to that very problem. So on the Kubernetes community site, you can find that weekly meeting for SIG contributor experience. And it's a great place for people to go and just get the lay of the land and understand how to contribute. And like was mentioned earlier, Paris Pittman has this wonderful mentoring program which is spinning up that is walking through junior people. I actually was talking to somebody who was in SIG storage as a new contributor, and was just saying it's such a relief to know how to navigate this landscape, and to know that you're working with great people like Saad Ali on this storage. You're literally working with one of the world's foremost experts on container and other storage. What communities make that easy for a junior developer? It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and we have the diversity scholarships. That's been a great program, and we very much invite women and students and folks from all backgrounds to come and contribute and get started. All of the SIGs have had introductory tracks here at KubeCon. We did our SIG track, and SIG PM actually doesn't require a technical background, so you can come in from any kind of background. You can start contributing. We have a lot of exciting, work that is a direct contribution and a great contribution to the project. So many ways to get involved.
One quickly too is give a plug for the release team, which is emerging as one of the primary ways to get involved in the project. Yeah, we've had three different presentations about that, and there's a great recent blog post.
SIG docs,
Yep.
writing docs.
Writing docs. That's something a non-technical person
Absolutely.
can do, pretty much.
Yeah.
Perna mentioned this concept of a contributor ladder. And it is totally fine to just use Kubernetes and not contribute back. You're giving up something and a chance for development and such, but it's totally legal, it's ethical, all those sort of things. But our hope is that a lot of people will start out just as a user, and for almost everyone, the first thing is they just have some itch that they want to scratch. They see some annoying bug in the documentation, there's something about their environment that's a little bit different and they need to configure it. And what we're doing a good job at, but trying to get even better at, is to say, okay, how do we take that person that maybe made their first pull request and then help them along to do something more substantial, maybe become a reviewer, and then eventually move up to things like SIG lead or steering committee, or not, or that they could just stay as a substantial contributor forever. I will give a quick shout out. Julia Evans at Stripe wrote a blog post that I just think is fantastic about them adopting Kubernetes internally, and she just described she had some challenging use cases around cron jobs, regular jobs, and she found bugs, and she read the Go code and found it pretty accessible and submitted pull requests on them. And then the feedback was, oh, that's not quite right, you didn't consider this corner case. But the fact that you can click through from her blog post and see those pull requests and see the way she engaged with the community, I found pretty inspiring, actually.
Well, good. So I guess we're coming up to the end of our recording. I just had a follow-up question for you, Dan, about, you were saying how the management of those of the organizations that are part of the Linux Foundation, part of CNCF, manage themselves. I mean, it's like an EU type of a policy, where then you're really wanting them to kind of think through the problems that they're having and figure those out. So, what is the investment that the CNCF makes? What is that investment that you'll make, over what's going to be just a really, really explosively, which is going to be a year or another of, I think, of substantial growth, and over time, as well.
So the most substantial investment that we make is we have something called the CNCF Service Desk, and every maintainer of all 20 CNCF projects get an account on it, and it's just a place to ask for things. And people ask for really trivial stuff on it. I mean, can I get T-shirts for this thing that I'm doing? Can I get a new logo for my site? We get much more substantial things of, hey, I have this new code that I want to take into my repo. I'm worried about the license behind it. Can you do a scan? But I really do want to emphasize that in some ways the best thing that CNCF can do is to be an extremely responsive organization where we see the maintainers of the existing projects as being our core constituency. And if they're happy with the services that we're providing, then they'll be more successful, and then tons of new projects will want to come in.
Any last thoughts, Libby, to ask anyone before we go?
No, I guess I would love to just hear what your vision is for that, for the end of the project, the health of the project. I know that all good projects must come to an end.
When Kubernetes bot reaches sentience and takes over the world.
Yeah, because that's something you have to plan for, right?
Yeah, I think in a way, yes. I think that there are, no matter what happens with the technology, everything that we're doing and learning is enduring. This is this is a watershed moment as a technology community. I really do believe that we have had some awarenesses evolve around this project that will not go away. I think we're really in a position where this is hitting all the right notes at the right time in the right place, and it's setting.
Did you say nodes or notes?
Well, I'm a musician, so it's notes. But, so it's really the zeitgeist of what we're in right now is something that people are going to look back on for a long time and understand that this was a moment where everything changed, and everybody and everything involved in this, the CNCF, all the companies that contribute, the individuals, we're all going to be able to look back on this and say, wow, that was a really pivotal moment in the history of technology.
My vision for the future of Kubernetes is that it is that platform for transformation in the enterprise, and that it is widely adopted across enterprise and across clouds to enable developer productivity, high utilization, and multiple applications to be that one platform.
Well, thank you all. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's been a great event. We've really enjoyed it here. We've had some fantastic conversations, and just look forward to
You've been with us for years now. We
Yeah.
hope you're going to stick around at all the future events as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. We really love being part of this community and trying to explain the things that are pretty complicated, I think, to almost everyone to some degree. So thanks, and we'll see you at the next show.
Thank
you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring the NewStack's coverage from KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con in Copenhagen, Denmark. Learn more about the CNCF and its technical projects at cncf.io. Listen to more episodes of the NewStack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.